There has been a lot of moves over the first couple of days of NFL free agency, and in today's video, we're going to break down the biggest winners and losers of NFL free agency so far. A lot of the criteria for being the biggest winners or losers not only has to deal with filling team needs, but a lot of it also has to deal with the contractual value of players NFL teams have signed. We're going to discuss teams that have improved significantly over the past few days, teams that have signed players to good value, teams that overpaid, and a whole lot more. There have also been a couple of trades over the past week or so, and while we discuss those trades in live streams, we haven't fully discussed those trades in videos on the channel, so they will also be addressed. And there is a lot to dive into in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by talking about the Chicago Bears and why they are one of the biggest winners in free agency so far. It is definitely worth noting that we are also including them because of the Joe Thuney trade and the Jonah Jackson trade from the Rams. So, Caleb Williams was sacked 68 times in his rookie year, and whether you are Caleb Williams or whether you are any of the other premier quarterbacks in the NFL, that is a problem. And the difference between Caleb being sacked the most at 68 and CJ Stroud being the second most sacked quarterback at 52 is 16 sacks. And to give you an idea of the difference between 1 and 2 with 16 sacks, between CJ Stroud getting sacked 52 times and a quarterback getting sacked 36 times was spots 2 and 12, to give you an idea of how bad the Bears' offensive line was at times in 2024. Now, it is definitely worth noting that Caleb walked into some of the sacks last year. Obviously, not every one of those 68 sacks is on the offensive line, but to go get Drew Dalman in free agency for an average annual value of $14 million per year, and what I cannot emphasize enough with not just the Drew Dalman signing, but any of the signings we're going to talk about in today's video, what matters most is the guarantees. The $42 million for Drew Dalman, or a player that we'll talk about later in today's video, Milton Williams, getting over $100 million. That is the agent being able to brag that they got their client a great deal, and good for all of these players and their families. But for the Bears to significantly improve the interior offensive line by bringing in Joe Thuney, Drew Dalman, and Jonah Jackson is a huge positive for them. Now, I do not want to go down the route and say that the Bears are offseason champions again for the third time in a row, whether it was the Bryce Young trade a couple of years ago, whether it was Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze last year. I don't want to go down that road, but they had a tremendous first couple of days of free agency, and even the trades to acquire upgrades along the interior offensive line. And now that they have the 10th overall pick, with them upgrading the offensive line the way they did, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they're going to be targeting Ashton Jeanty at number 10 overall. He's obviously a phenomenal running back prospect, and the biggest thing is, well, not just for Caleb, but for any running back to enter the situation, is to be able to run behind the offensive line. And I know Joe Thuney's a little older. I know Jonah Jackson will be 28 and is coming off of an injury-riddled season, but you improve the offensive line for a young quarterback and probably a young running back as well, and that was tremendous for the Bears to be able to do so. So that's a big reason they're in today's video. Now, I will be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Grady Jarrett signing here for $28.5 million guaranteed for him going on 32 years old. That one I wasn't the biggest fan of, but where we are with the Bears is they had to upgrade the interior offensive line, because what matters is the development of Caleb Williams under Ben Johnson, and for them to be able to bring in 3 interior offensive line, significantly upgrade where they are, is a big reason why they're in today's video. So good for the Bears and good for Caleb Williams for getting the upgrade along the interior offensive line, and potentially even Ashton Jeanty too. One other note as to why I love the Bears getting the interior offensive line upgrades so much is because they gave up a 6th round pick for Jonah Jackson and a 4th round pick for Joe Thuney. So anytime you can upgrade your interior offensive line for a couple of day 3 picks, and significant upgrades at that, especially with a young quarterback entering a pivotal point in his career with a new head coach, and given that he was sacked the most in the NFL by a significant margin last year, I'm all for it. Now, for a team that I wasn't the biggest fan of what they did in free agency, at least relative to the value they got, was the Carolina Panthers. There was a point a couple of days ago where they had Milton Brown, and then Milton Brown eventually signed with the Patriots. Now, Milton Brown was obviously going to be the most coveted interior defensive lineman within this free agency class. He's young, he's coming off of a big year, and it makes a lot of sense for teams to go after Milton Williams right now, especially with especially with the production we saw from him in the Super Bowl and just how much trenches matter. Obviously, everyone knew how much trenches matter heading into the postseason. That wasn't anything new, but it was really emphasized during this year's postseason. So for Carolina to miss out on Milton Williams and to potentially pair him with Derek Brown was disheartening. But they also gave Trayvon Merrick a 3-year, $51 million contract. And I don't have a problem with Trayvon Merrick. I don't think he's a bad player by any means. But I'm not a huge fan of paying Trayvon Merrick an average of $17 million per year when there was a possibility of them getting Milton Williams. I'd rather pay Milton Williams more per year than I would pay Trayvon Merrick $17 million. I was also a little underwhelmed with the Tershawn Wharton signing for, again, an average annual value of $15 million. I do hope Wharton plays well for the Panthers, and what I will at least kind of come around and positively say about that signing is he'll be in a situation in Carolina similar to where he was with Kansas City, where he's going to have another good defensive tackle next to him in Derek Brown, and he's not going to have to be this all around great defensive tackle and be a 75 pressure year, 10 sack a year guy along the interior. But hopefully that works out. I know Wharton's coming off of a good contract year, and I hope that it is not buyer's remorse in a couple of months. But $30 million guaranteed for Wharton, I thought was quite a bit for who he is as a player. Now, I did like the Patrick Jones signing for 2 years, $20 million. Patrick Jones has been a key contributor for the Minnesota Vikings over the past couple of years. And Patrick Jones, just to give you an idea of the production that he had in 2024 with the Vikings, he had a 7-sack year and he had 12 quarterback hits. So if you were giving $10 million for that, and that also upgrades your pass rushing situation for the moment, there's also a really good chance that Carolina drafts another edge in the draft in about a month. I think that's a pretty good signing. Bobby Brown is also a solid defensive line signing for the Panthers, and for the value that they got Bobby Brown for at an average of $7 million per year and only 45% of the contract being guaranteed versus the 67% of the Tershawn Wharton contract being guaranteed, 30 of $45 million being guaranteed for Wharton. I actually like the Bobby Brown signing better based on the contract value for the Panthers. But I was really, really hoping that instead of paying $22 million annually to Tershawn Wharton and Bobby Brown, I was really hoping that they would have gotten Milton Williams. But I hope this all works out for the Panthers. And positively, what I will say about this for Carolina is their defense last year obviously wasn't good, and that's kind of an understatement. Everyone knows that. So for them to upgrade the talent is key. I just don't want them, or anybody for that matter, to overpay. Thought they overpaid a little bit. That's kind of the price of doing business on the free market. But I wasn't the biggest fan of what they did, mainly because of the implications of losing out on Milton Williams. Now, what I will say about the J.C. Horn signing, I know this is not technically free agency, but I thought that was a lot of money for J.C. Horn, considering he's missed 45% of his career games. I hope J.C. Horn stays healthy, because when he is healthy, obviously every Panthers fan knows this, but he's one of the best corners in the NFL. He made the Pro Bowl this past year, hopefully the first of many. I hope J.C.'s, the worst days are behind him injury-wise, and that he can be that guy for the next 4 or 5 years, and that extension proves to be worth it. But I thought $70 million guaranteed for a player who, again, has missed over 30 career games in 4 years was a lot. So for Carolina and free agency specifically, wasn't the biggest fan of what they did, but to positively spin it for Panthers fans, they did improve the roster defensively, and that was a big thing for them entering free agency. The Denver Broncos had a couple of big defensive free agent signings as they brought in safety Talanoa Hufanga and linebacker Dre Greenlaw over the first couple of days of free agency. Everyone knows about Dre Greenlaw and how he suffered a major injury in Super Bowl 58 against the Chiefs, and whenever that happened, there was a lot of concern about how he would recover from that point, but I'm glad for Dre Greenlaw and his family for him to get the bag the way he did, as it was a 3-year, $35 million deal. Dre Greenlaw, when healthy, is the definition of a steady Eddie. He's a really good football player. He's a really good run defender, and I think he is a tone setter, and that's obviously meant in the best way possible. And when you're able to bring in both him and Talanoa Hufanga to a team that already finished top 3 in points allowed per game last year, in a conference where you are especially going to need that, because we all know how loaded the AFC is, I don't see how this can be viewed as anything other than been a positive. Now, the thing with the Broncos is they are going to need to bring in offensive weapons, but the biggest thing here for the Broncos as to why I think they're winners is they didn't overpay for receivers or tight ends in the first couple of days of free agency just to fill a need. They brought in two really good football players, and the guarantees with Hufanga here are not that bad. It's $20 million, and whenever you have 44% of the contract guaranteed, the biggest thing to remember is you can get out of the contract after 2 years. And like we discussed earlier, a lot of the numbers within free agency are kind of that agent talk, if you will, just to say that they got their guy paid. And I don't know if there's a better representation of that than Kirk Cousins getting $180 million last offseason, despite everybody knowing he wasn't actually going to receive $180 million from the Falcons. So the reason that I bring that up is because Hufanga at this point can probably be best viewed as a wild card because he's only played in 17 games over the past 2 years, but it is definitely worth noting he was a first-team All-Pro back in 2022. So with the Broncos, with where they are currently, they are in a really good position because they obviously had more success than anybody would have thought last year. They went back to the postseason for the first time in nearly a decade. Bo Nix had 34 total touchdowns, and now you are upgrading the defense for a unit that's already not just good, not just above average, but great. So in a conference where you are going to have to, and ultimately in a division where you're going to have to go against Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes for nearly a quarter of your schedule, and then you're eventually going at some point to have to run into the Burrow, Lamar, or Josh Allens of the world, anytime you can upgrade the defense and not completely overpay for it, while still having a quarterback on a rookie contract and still being able to address the receiver and tight end position in the draft and have those guys grow with Bo Nix over the next couple of years of his career, I'm all for it. So I thought Denver did a really good job, and they also brought in Trent Sherfield as a receiver. Technically, they did bring in some receiver help. I don't think that's a huge signing either way, but technically they did address the receiver position in free agency. But obviously the big ones here for their defense is Hufanga and Greenlaw, and the Broncos defense is loaded, and it's a no-fly zone, and I fully expect it to continue to be that way, and there's a reason they are one of the best defenses. They have been one of the best defenses in football over the past few years. Now, for this next part, we're going to discuss two teams in one, and we're going to talk about the Houston Texans first. I don't like the Laramie Tunsil trade, and like I said, for the free agency video, we're also going to wrap a couple of trades in as well. I don't like this trade at all for the Texans, and I know they received pretty decent draft capital. I mean, decent, not great, as they received a package of a 2, a 3, and a 4, and the worst part for the Texans is that second-round pick is a next year's second-round pick. So there's a lot to unpack here with this trade, and I know Laramie Tunsil commits a lot of penalties. He commits a lot of false starts, but Brett Coleman had a tweet where it was something to the effect of, over the past couple of years, he is the second best tackle in terms of pressure rate, and it's less than 4% on pass blocking snaps. So yes, he commits false starts, but that's something you are willing to live with, especially when you have CJ Stroud back there fighting for his life nearly every snap the way that he was this year. And like we mentioned during the Bears part with Caleb Williams, Stroud was the second most sacked quarterback in 2024. And a lot of CJ Stroud's regression this past year wasn't because he simply forgot how to play football at the level that he did during his rookie year, or that defenses were fooling him in year 2 because they had tape on him from year 1. It was due in large part to the lackluster offensive line, not Laramie Tunsil necessarily, but mainly the interior offensive line. And for the Texans to trade Laramie Tunsil, one of the few bright spots along the offensive line, I thought was a really bad process. And obviously the Texans haven't really brought in all that many guys. Laken Tomlinson would be the most notable in terms of the offensive line to help out CJ Stroud. But now you are kind of pigeonholing yourself as the Texans, because you have to address the offensive line of the draft. And even though you have the extra draft capital, you probably have to burn some of that just to trade up, because everybody knows you need to go get an offensive lineman at some point in the first round. Now for the Commanders, I loved the Laramie Tunsil trade for him. I even love the Debo trade for what it was, because it was only a 5th round pick. Obviously, you have to take on the contract with that, and that's a lot of the times within the trade. If you are trading for a veteran and you seemingly get a former good or great player for a late day 3 pick, obviously a lot of the times it's the contract, and that's what it was with Debo. But when you could have Debo be your second wide receiver behind Terry McLaurin for a 5th round pick, I'm all for it every single time, especially when it's an upgrade and you have a young quarterback on a rookie contract that just had a tremendous rookie season the way Jaden Daniels did. Obviously, love the Laramie Tunsil trade for the Commanders as well, but one signing that I did not like for Washington at all, and I'll be just completely honest, I thought this was one of the worst value signings of free agency, was Javon Kinlaw going to the Washington Commanders. I am not a Javon Kinlaw fan, and last year he was on the Jets, and Jets fans were pretty fed up with Javon Kinlaw, and what's frustrating about him is he gets flushed out in the run game quite a bit, but not only that, you can, if you are a Commanders fan, you can kind of say, well, he's going to play next to Daron Payne, so hopefully there's going to be some positivity there that he's not going to get as flushed out because he's going to have another good player next to him. But he played next to Quinnen Williams last year, and a lot of the times was a non-factor. So to give Javon Kinlaw $30 million guaranteed, I know they have the money right now, but I thought it was one of the worst value contracts in all of free agency. So for the Commanders, loved what they did in bringing in Debo for what the trade was, by the way. I don't think Debo is going to be this 1,200-yard receiver. I would be pretty surprised if he goes for 1,000, let alone 1,200 at this point. But for everything they did right with the Laramie Tunsil trade, I was not a fan of the Javon Kinlaw at all. But big upgrades along the offense for what they were. Happy for Jaden Daniels, especially now that he will have a really good pass-protecting left tackle. And I know Brandon Coleman played up at times in 2024. He technically gave up, I want to say, 10 sacks this past year, which sacks are, especially with a mobile quarterback, they can be kind of finicky because there's times where quarterbacks run directly into them. And you know, if you have like a pass-protecting tackle right here and the quarterback drifts back here and then the edge rusher, all he has to do is just walk right into him. That's on the quarterback, not necessarily on the tackle. Not to say that every single tackle Brandon Coleman gave up was like that, but he can move somewhere else along the offensive line, and I thought he played better than he should have for a third-round rookie. So you keep Brandon Coleman, and Laramie Tunsil is a substantial upgrade from what you previously had. And the Commanders did a lot of great things on offense. Javon Kinlaw was not a good free agent signing for them, and I will stand by that, especially pertaining to the value, and especially with the fact that they gave him $30 million guaranteed. We're going to have another 2-for-1 here as we're going to quickly discuss the DK Metcalf trade for the Steelers and then talk about Seattle's free agency, which of course includes bringing in Sam Darnold. So for the Steelers, when we talk about bringing in a receiver and a player like DK Metcalf, obviously a lot of what you are trading for is the contract, and that's what we just discussed with Deebo Samuel and the Commanders. But I really like the DK Metcalf trade for the Steelers because you are at minimum getting a 900-yard receiver and probably a 1,000-yard receiver if they simply feed him the football. I do think DK is a very talented player, and I think he should be a multiple-time Pro Bowler, as in 4 or 5 times by the time he retires. I like DK a lot, and he went for over 1,300 yards back in 2020, and I don't think it's unreasonable for him to have another 1,100 or 1,200 yard year in the right situation. I also like this trade for the Steelers because it is filling a need for a team that desperately needed offensive help. I mocked Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka several times to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and for them to give up not a first-round pick, but a second-round pick is a good job for the Steelers. I mean, if you are drafting Emeka Egbuka in the first round, honestly, you're hoping that he can become a slightly better version of DK in what we've seen over the past couple of years, which is a consistent 900-yard or 1,000-yard player, and now you're giving up a second-round pick instead of a first-round pick. Obviously, yes, you have to pay DK $30 million, but I don't think it's that big of a deal because of how much the salary cap is going up over the next few years. So I really like that for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, they've only signed Malik Harrison. He is a backup rotational linebacker, so not a lot to be said on that matter. I do think at this point, nothing has happened, but I do think they will sign Aaron Rodgers, and whenever you would have an offense of Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, and George Pickens, that is really beneficial for the Steelers because Aaron Rodgers loves those boundary throws, and DK Metcalf and George Pickens both excel at the boundary throws. Down the sideline, deep shots, contested catches. I like this trade for the Steelers, and I don't think they're done in free agency. Not even close. Now, for the Seahawks, losing both DK Metcalf and Sam Darnold in a span of 48 hours was tough, but let me preface this with, I know Geno Smith is a really talented player, but when you ask the simple question of, is Geno Smith going to lead this team to a Super Bowl victory in the next couple of years based on where the Seahawks' current roster is, and I know that is a very shallow question because there's so many factors that go into that simple question of, is this quarterback going to lead this team to a Super Bowl? There's a lot of factors that go into that. Interior offensive line is, of course, a big one, which Seattle desperately needs. But to answer that question, I don't think Geno is going to lead this group, especially given that he's 34, will turn 35 during the season, and then you add in that, he'll be 36 next year, 37 the year after. I think it was a good time to move on from a 34-year-old quarterback. Now, the reality is here with Sam Darnold, what Seattle is hoping for is a Baker Mayfield type situation in Tampa that works out for the Seahawks. Because right now, Baker Mayfield is, to me, one of the more underrated players in football. And whether you guys know this or not, Lamar Jackson just had one of the best seasons ever. He had 41 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And the reason that I bring Lamar up is because Baker Mayfield threw as many touchdowns in 2024 as Lamar Jackson. He threw 41 touchdowns. And that's kind of it's just not talked about. And if Seattle can have that guy in Sam Darnold, and they can have him be their quarterback for the next couple of years, then it's a win. Because this is a guy, Sam Darnold's only 28 years old. Baker Mayfield is only 29 years old. Tampa probably has their guy for the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and they got him because another team didn't want him. Now, the Vikings are in a different situation with J.J. McCarthy, and he's a first-round pick, and we'll get to the Vikings in a minute. But if Seattle can fix the interior offensive line, the potential is there. Now, I know Sam Darnold obviously peed his pants in the 2 biggest games of the year in Week 18 and in the wild card round. Everybody knows that. That's not a mystery. But if they can fix the interior offensive line, which is going to be a big one before the season starts, the potential is there. And at the end of the day, I don't want to say only because it's obviously a lot of money, but 55 of the $100 million contract was guaranteed. And for Seattle, they're in a tough situation because they were never going to trade up for Shedeur Sanders to number 2 or 3 overall, and they were not going to go up to draft Cam Ward. So your options were always going to be limited. And if you ask the question of, would you rather go with Sam Darnold, or who is 28 years old, has the potential to be your guy for the next 4 or 5 years, or to potentially go all the way up to number 1 or 2 overall, that would be pick 18 this year, a 1 next year, probably Devin Witherspoon on top of it, and you get the point of how ridiculous of a trade that would be for them to go up. Probably even more than that, just being completely honest. So Seattle didn't have a lot of options. I like that they went out and got Sam Darnold, just fix the interior offensive line, give him another weapon. I think there's potential there for Sam Darnold to be the guy for the next 3 or 4 years in the Emerald City. The New England Patriots are up, and one of the biggest things that they had to do this offseason was simply bring in better talent, and they did. They brought in Milton Williams for a 4-year, $104 million deal. We'll talk more about the guarantees in a second. They brought in Carlton Davis, and that's a signing that I actually like a lot. The Harold Landry signing received a lot of criticism, rightfully so, and we'll also get to that. But one of the biggest signings that I liked throughout really all of free agency so far was Robert Spillane. I have loved Robert Spillane for several years now. I think the best way to describe his game is a heat-seeking missile, and anytime you can bring in a player like Robert Spillane for an average annual value of $11 million per year, 20 of it being guaranteed, it's essentially a 2-year deal, and honestly, I think he's a little underpaid relative to some other linebackers at the position. I love the signing for New England, and that's definitely by every definition a Mike Vrabel player. This is a guy, I don't want to use the cliche, first one in, last one out, and all that the way that we describe some gritty wide receivers, if you will, but he is that type of player. He's a locker room guy. He's a glue guy. He's going to do his job well. He is a steady Eddie at the position, and that's a term that I like because it describes players of, you know what you're going to get, you don't have to overthink it, and New England is also upgrading the linebacker position on top of it. So with Milton Williams here, the big thing to note is the $63 million guaranteed, and that's obviously what matters for every player, not just Milton Williams. Now, I know there's going to be some pushback with Milton Williams because that's, a 9-figure contract for a player in Milton Williams that has never made a Pro Bowl is a lot of money, but he's coming off of a 5-sack season, but Milton Williams also had, he had a lot of pressures down the stretch. Now, one thing that I know Eagles fans did discuss and were not necessarily all that vocal about, but one thing that was kind of acknowledged was he was in a phenomenal situation under Vic Fangio and on the same defensive line as Jalen Carter. And even if you want to add in Nolan Smith for that matter too, and Josh Sweat, and obviously Milton Williams was a beneficiary of a lot of other great players along the defensive line. But Milton Williams over the past couple of years has steadily gotten better. He had a career high this year. He had 40 pressures in the regular season. He had a really good postseason. And Milton Williams specifically in the postseason had 14 pressures in 4 games. And we talk about so often on the channel about trench players developing as they get older and more accustomed to the league. And I think Milton Williams is a good example of that. Now, is he $26 million good? That is certainly questionable, and I think the reasonable answer is probably not, especially when you look at his body of work. But I think it's also fair to say the best for Milton Williams is yet to come. So if they can have a player that can play next to a Christian Barmore and even Keon White for that matter, you can have a guy that can have 45, 50 pressures a year, maybe 6 or 7 sacks, and a guy that steadily contributes along the defensive line. And like we've talked about this offseason, trenches matter. And anytime you can have Keon White, Milton Williams, and Christian Barmore, hopefully he comes back, hopefully everything's all right there, that is a really good trio. And even if you have to overpay one right now because Keon White is still under the rookie contract, the way that I would positively spin this for Patriots fans is think of Milton Williams and Keon White's contracts kind of together, if you will, if that makes sense. So you kind of have, one guy making 26, one guy making $2 million, but you have the production of 2 players for a total of $28 million until Keon White gets paid. And I know Milton Williams was guaranteed $63 million, but he's not going to prevent anybody from receiving an extension. They're not going to say to Christian Gonzalez next year, hey, Christian, we like your game. You're a really good corner, but we can't pay you because we signed Milton Williams. So, yes, it's a lot of money for now, but I like where New England is heading by bringing in good football players. Now, Carlton Davis, 3 years, $54 million. What needs to be remembered here is the $34 million in guarantees. The $18 million average annual value is a lot for a player that regularly misses a couple of games a year, but for the games that you're going to have Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez out there, it's going to be a great signing, and I hope that Carlton stays healthy. That's been a problem with him over the past couple of years. Not that he's, playing 3 games a year, but he's playing 13 or 14 games a year rather than 16 or 17. So hopefully Carlton stays healthy. Now, with Harold Landry, this was a player that Marcus Whitman and I discussed live on stream. I didn't exactly defend this signing, but I was kind of in the belief or the mindset of, okay, yeah, it's not good, but I go back to what I said about Milton Williams, where it's not going to prevent any contract extensions. And this is kind of a example of it. You have the money, you have to spend it, but this was not wise spending for Harold Landry. I hope Harold Landry turns it around and becomes the player that he was a couple of years ago, because Harold Landry a couple years ago was a really good player. And I would argue at a point that Harold Landry was one of the more underrated players in football. But last year, for reference, he had 30 pressures on 423 pass rushing snaps, which obviously isn't great. And then back in 2021, to give you an idea, this is going on 4 years now, which is not exactly great, but he had 64 pressures on 529 pass rushing snaps. So the Landry contract is mostly a 2-year deal. The way that I would like to think about this is it's a 2-year contract, and the guarantees aren't great over, or nearly 60% of it's guaranteed. Hopefully it works out, but not the biggest fan of that one. Now, Morgan Moses, I did like that signing. Only 11 guaranteed. You have an average annual value of $8 million per year. And Morgan Moses is certainly old, but Morgan Moses is a player that over the past couple of years, he's just been a really solid football player. And you know what you're getting. Yes, like we said, he is old. He is 34. But if you can get one good year from Morgan Moses and really upgrade your offensive line from what it was, then that is worth it alone. And I think that's what kind of needs to be noted with the Morgan Moses signing, with a couple of other signings from other teams in free agency, is if you were signing guys that are 33, 34 years old, this kind of applies to the Bears by trading for Joe Thuney, and then even not really Jonah Jackson, but more so Joe Thuney. If you can buy a year of production, maybe 2 years for Moses or Thuney, then it's worth it. So I hope it works out. I would be very surprised if Morgan Moses plays all 3 years. I think this is more of a 2-year deal. The guarantees would suggest that. But New England upgraded their roster in a big way, especially with, they simply upgraded the roster. Now, the contracts are a different discussion, but they upgraded with Milton Williams, Robert Spillane, Carlton Davis, and Morgan Moses. So for where they were a week ago and where they are now, they upgraded the roster, and they still have a top 5 pick in the 2025 draft, and I'm eager to see where they go next month. The Tennessee Titans are up, and I'm going to be honest here. The way this team has operated over the past couple of years really, really frustrates me. And this is another prime example. I know Nicholas Petit-Frere, let's just start off with that, is not a good player. Unfortunately, I have watched more tape of Nicholas Petit-Frere as an offensive lineman than I'd like. He is not a good football player. He has allowed countless sacks, and 2023 Will Levis at times did not stand a chance, because as soon as the ball was snapped, whether it was Trayvon Walker, whether it was any other pass rusher going against Nicholas Petit-Frere, Trayvon Walker, I know, got him a couple of times really bad. The quarterback wouldn't have stood a chance no matter who it was. Joe Montana, John Elway, does not matter. So you had to upgrade the position. But to give Dan Moore $50 million guaranteed is poor roster management. And I would love to have been a fly on the wall for the conversation between Dan Moore's agent and the Titans and Mike Bergonzi and A.B. Adam Strunk and everybody that was in there. Everybody was in that room that said, you know what? My client, Dan Moore, just allowed the most sacks in the NFL. He allowed 12 sacks this past year. You need to give him 50 guaranteed, an average annual value of $20.5 per year. Now, if you give $20.5 million to a good left tackle, go for it. That's you have to. That's a franchise left tackle. Dan Moore is not a franchise left tackle. And the reason why I am particularly fired up about this is because, first off, he's not good. Second, the one part that really, really irritates me within this is the Titans are not a good roster, especially offensively. Now, defense, that's a different discussion. I don't think they're bad, but they're not. They underperformed in 2024. But the offense is not good. And what really grinds my gears, if you will, is letting Nick Westbrook-Akine walk out the door for $3.25 million per year, and the message that sets along with it. Now, I want to have a discussion here, a civilized discussion, because this is more than just he left and we'll just, goodbye, thanks for everything. There's a chance that Westbrook-Akine did not want to stay in Nashville and stay with the Titans based on what we've seen over the past few years. Quite frankly, I couldn't blame him. I want to start the discussion with that. But if there was a chance where the Titans could have coughed up instead of $3.2 million in guarantees, which is all he received, and there was a chance that they could have paid him 2 years, $8 million, kept him, paid a little more for him for who he is as a player, I think they should have done that. And here's why. The Titans roster right now, their top 3 receivers are Calvin Ridley, which you paid a lot of money for him last year. He's going to stay. He's going to be the guy for at least one more year. That is what that is. You can't get around that. Treylon Burks is a draft bust. He's still on the roster right now. I don't know where they're going to go in the rest of free agency and the draft, because they still have to fill out their roster, so we'll see where they go. I wouldn't be surprised if Treylon Burks gets cut, so that's kind of the reason why I bring him up. Tyler Boyd is still right now on the roster. He's not, he's kind of washed at this point. He is what he is as a player. He didn't have a good 2024 season. I know the quarterback play wasn't good, but he's also not very good himself. But after that, it's Mason Kinsey, who has 4 career receptions, Colton Dowell, who has 1 career reception, and Bryce Oliver, who has 6 career receptions. So somehow, some way, they're going to have to fill out the roster. They're going to have to fill out more receivers. And I don't like the precedent this sets of, hey, we're just going to let Nick Westbrook-Akine walk out the door, and we're going to give Dan Moore $50 million guaranteed. Now, I know Westbrook-Akine and Mike Bergonzi have no relationship. He's not a Mike Bergonzi guy. That happens a lot. And whenever you see draft picks, second, third round picks the following year, they have a disappointing rookie season. New GM comes in, their career is not as bright of an outlook as it once was. That happens. That's a business. It's part of football. But to not even cough up the money again, there is a conversation worth having that Nick Westbrook-Akine could have said, hey, I'd rather live in Miami than Nashville. Tua is a better quarterback than probably what the Titans are going to do in 2025. I can compete for a starting spot down there, or at least a third receiver. We'll see. There's a chance that discussion could have been had, and that there's a chance that behind closed doors, Nick could have said, hey, thank you guys, but I want to test this out, and I wish everybody in Nashville good luck. There's a chance for that. But if the Titans didn't offer Westbrook-Akine a matched contract, or even a little more to stay, this is not, I mean, this is just poor roster management, if that is how it played out. And my frustration here isn't to hate on the Titans or to have their fan base be upset with me. It is my frustration with the front office and everything that has transpired over the past few years. First off, I don't think Mike Bergonzi right now should be the Titans general manager. I am a firm believer that Rand Carthon should still be there. So I have a lot of frustration with this organization right now, just because of how they've managed decisions over the past 2.5 years. And I think this, for me, is just the cherry on top. You have Dan Moore come in, lead the league in sacks allowed, and you give him $50 million guaranteed, and you let one of the few contributors that you have in Westbrook-Akine leave for pennies. Now, I know Westbrook-Akine is not a top 10 receiver in the league. He's not even top probably 50, but maybe top 50. But he's not, no, probably not top 50. You get the point. Why did that happen? And like I said, it is absolutely worth noting that he could have just said, I don't want to be in Nashville. Thank you guys for everything. Thank you for giving me my chance. And I wish everybody the best. But if that didn't happen and he wasn't even offered a contract, that is very, very poor management from the Titans. And I also think it's a bad deal to begin with, to give Dan Moore $50 million. And Dan Moore does not have the athleticism to play right tackle. That was noted during his time in Pittsburgh. So to have Dan Moore and Peter Skoronski and then have JC go back to the right side, I don't necessarily hate the JC Latham going back to the right side. That was where he played in college during Alabama. He was a top 10 pick for a reason. I am a big fan of JC Latham. I cannot get over how much I detest giving Dan Moore $50 million guaranteed and letting Westbrook-Akine walk out the door because of what that represents. Now, as I was recording this, the Titans actually signed Van Jefferson to a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. Again, that's kind of my frustration all in one summary with the Titans, with not bringing back Westbrook-Akine, but signing Van Jefferson for a player that has 44 total receptions over the last 2 years. Again, I did want to point out that Westbrook-Akine may have privately said, hey guys, thanks for everything, there's no chance, but that's my frustration with the Titans in really just 2 transactions there. But anyway, the Minnesota Vikings are up. They let Sam Darnold walk, and they have been active, and that would be a pretty extreme understatement. They brought in Will Fries, they brought in Ryan Kelly along the offensive line, and as a Vikings fan, I'll speak from both the fan standpoint and the analyst standpoint. The Vikings fan standpoint, first up, is I have been incredibly frustrated watching my team go out and basically get their teeth knocked in over the past couple of years, whether it's from Jalen Carter, Dexter Lawrence, basically any good interior defensive lineman that just feasts against Garrett Bradbury, Blake Brandel, Ed Ingram, and it's incredibly frustrating to watch. So, now from the analyst standpoint, it was pivotal to give J.J. McCarthy help up front before he took a snap, because if they didn't, you are limiting what you can do with your quarterback. Obviously, you're going to have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, and that would be good for any quarterback, but the interior offensive line has been a struggle for this team for probably close to a decade. Not an exaggeration to say. Whether it was Mike Remmers, whether it was Drew Samia, there's been countless names along the interior offensive line that's been downright frustrating to watch. And to have a first-round quarterback go in with those guys in front of him would not have been doing him a service. So to go get Will Fries, to go get Ryan Kelly, I know Ryan Kelly's a little up there in age. I know he's missed some time. It was a substantial upgrade if they can stay healthy. So that was great for the Vikings. Even along the defensive line, they have been bullied at times. I think back to a 2023 game against the Eagles, in which the Eagles, obviously one of the premier offensive line teams in football, they ran for over 250 yards against the Vikings. DeAndre Swift had like 175 yards. I think back to that night quite often because they needed to beef up the interior defensive line as well. And they did a really good job in 2024 of defending the run. They finished top 5 in both yards allowed and yards per carry against, which was a huge positive. But the pass rush from the interior at times for the Vikings was certainly lacking. I like Harrison Phillips a lot, but Harrison Phillips is not exactly an Aaron Donald in terms of getting after the quarterback. And to at least be fair, not a lot of players are like Aaron Donald. I mean, he's one of one, but the point is he's not a pass rushing defensive tackle. So to go get Jonathan Allen, and at this point, they have, it's pretty close to reaching an agreement with Javon Hargrave. That was reported over 24 hours ago at this point. So I'm assuming that Javon Hargrave is going to be a Viking. We'll talk both sides, but to at minimum, go get Jonathan Allen is huge for this team to be able to have a guy on third down to get after the quarterback. And assuming assuming Javon Hargrave is a Viking as well, you have two good players that can get after the quarterback on third down. Now, I know there were a couple of people that tweeted at me, and I've even seen this with my eyes, if you will. Javon Hargrave at times can get washed out in the run game, but the Vikings don't really need him in the run game. They simply need him to push the pocket and to be that two-gap penetrator on third down, 3rd and 7. Jared Goff's going back. We need you in his face right now. Jordan Love's going back. We need you in his face because we know Gink and Gernard can get home on the outside, and even Dallas Turner taking a step up in 2025, but we need that interior push, which Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave can both provide. So for this team, there was a graphic that was tweeted out. For this team to be able to add nearly 1,200 pounds of beef has been something that I've wanted this team to do for plural years. Thought it was phenomenal by them. Now, I will say one thing that I was not the biggest fan. Well, let me back this up because I loved bringing him back. Byron Murphy, you can definitely argue, was a bit of an overpay. I loved bringing him back. He had a great year last year. He had like 6 interceptions. It was one of the most in the league. Corners are volatile. They're going to have, we saw Sauce Gardner go back-to-back first-team All-Pro, have a down year for his standards in 24. There's a chance Byron Murphy regresses a bit. There's actually a pretty decent chance. I do want that to be acknowledged. But you're only giving him 34 guaranteed, so in a lot of ways, again, it's a 2-year contract. I really like what the Vikings did. I really, really like what the Vikings did, and this is what you can do when you have a quarterback on a rookie contract. You can go out and get those guys in the trenches. And this has been something I've been wanting this team to do for years. And for them to bring in over 1,000 pounds of beef and to significantly improve the roster in the trenches gives them a fighting chance against the Eagles and the Rams and the best teams that are really, really good in the trenches. And for Minnesota specifically, their 2025 success is going to rely on J.J. McCarthy and how he performs, because this is not an exaggeration to say this is one of the best situations a quarterback could ever walk into. Maybe the best. I don't know about that, but it's definitely up there. I'd put it up there with the Mahomes from 2018 when he had Tyreek and Travis Kelce and everybody else. But the defense is good. The offensive line is now really, really good, especially with a healthy Darisaw, a healthy Brian O'Neill. Now you're getting Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. Aaron Jones just had 1,500 total yards. Justin Jefferson is a future Hall of Famer if he stays healthy. Jordan Addison is a budding 1,000-yard receiver. TJ Hawkinson had a down year in 24, but hopefully he bounces back in 25. This situation is phenomenal. And for the Vikings to be coming off of a 14-win season and significantly upgrade the roster, I think they are the biggest winner so far in NFL free agency. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. That helps the channel tremendously, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. So until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.